16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace, doing nothing at all. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour he went out and he found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they said. He said to them, "You go also work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard came to his foreman. "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired at the 11th hour came and each received a denarius. So when those who came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them and said, "Friend, I'm not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I gave the man who was hired last the same as I gave to you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. As we consider this passage and its implications, I wanted to ask you and open with a question. Are you familiar with the phrase "lost in translation"? I believe there was a movie years back with Bill Murray. It had to do with this topic of language barriers. If you are studying a second language, if you've ever studied or looked at another one, or maybe English is not your primary language and you've had to learn English, you figure out very quickly we have these things called language barriers. Things get lost in translation. Words don't always equally correspond to one another, or their meanings seem to drift, or what we say in one language may not necessarily be the same in another. I'll give you a simple case in point. Here in the United States and in English, we normally talk about things coming from the heart. And when I say that, what do I mean? That from our sentiments, from our affections, we are expressing ourselves. And when somebody gets up and they sing with all their heart, or they play baseball with all their heart, or they give their heart over to someone that they love, what are we saying? That the whole totality of our emotions and our affections are being poured into that person or event or whatever it may be. But that's not the case in other cultures. In Africa, for an example, if you want to speak from the seat of your emotions, you don't say or refer to your heart. You refer to your liver. Now imagine getting a card from somebody from Africa. "Oh, I love you with all my liver." It's like, what is that about? I mean, are you like an organ donor? Or, I mean, is this a cadaver, or something? I mean, it really sparks all sorts of crazy questions because what? Things are lost in what? Translation. Well, God has communicated to us in a variety of fashions. He speaks to us through His creation. He speaks to us through our conscience. He speaks through us through circumstances. He has spoken to us through His Word. And finally, He has spoken to us through His Son. And as He speaks, we, who are sinful creatures, who are veiled by our own prejudices and our own shortcomings and our own iniquities, lose things in translation. There's a passage in John's Gospel, John chapter 1, verse 17, that the law came through Moses. Grace and truth has come through Jesus Christ. And we have a tendency to miss the definitions of what it means to be living in the kingdom. In the parable of the vineyard and the workers, Jesus seeks to clarify a message that God has been speaking through the ages because it has been veiled by our own sin and our own envy and our own struggles. We find in this particular passage, Jesus opens and explains this is how the kingdom is going to operate. And then He uses a parable, a parallel, with an agricultural scenario that almost everybody would understand, working in a vineyard. The scene is very simple. It opens up at the break of day. We have a landowner who has a vineyard out and has sent the foreman into town to hire day workers. Bear in mind, this scene is most likely taking place in the fall. Typically, a vineyard would hire people right during the grape harvest, which happened at the end of the summer in Israel, right before the rainy season would commence in October or so, and the planting of the wheat and the barley would commence. So they would try to get the grapes in as fast as they possibly could, September, early October, before the rains came, and this way they would now have and garner their harvest. There was always tension around harvest time because the grapes were grown on the ground. When you think of a vineyard, we normally think of California or France, where you see grapes growing up trellises and ladders. They're vines, and they typically grow upwards, and they grow very well that way. Get the fruit off the ground so it doesn't rot. In Israel, when you grow grapes, especially during the first century, they didn't have the trellises. They just would grow all over the ground. And what the owner of the vineyard would do is send out workers throughout the season, and they just pick up the clusters of grapes as they were growing and ripening and put them on stones. And that was it. So the pressure was on before the rain started to fall to get those grapes in and harvested, because they could rot on the ground and you could lose your crop. So we're in a pressure scenario. The foreman goes out, it is the crack of dawn. In Israel, when you would hire somebody for a day labor, it normally happened at 6 in the morning. A typical work day during the first century in Israel was 12 hours, 6 to 6. You started at 6, you ended at 6, and you got about 2 hours of a break in between. So basically you're working about a 10-hour day. Half an hour break in the mid-morning, an hour break midday, and then another half an hour break mid-afternoon, and then you finished up at 6 o'clock. And that's what's taking place here. The foreman would go into town and look either at the city gate, or if there was a town square, if it was a little bit bigger city, somewhere in the middle of town there would be a place where workers would congregate, and the foreman would go and say, okay, we need 6 people to go out and pick grapes today, or plant wheat or barley, or do whatever you got to do. And this practice actually continues to this day. If you ever live or go down to South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, from Laredo right down to Brownsville, very rich agricultural region, lots of fruits and vegetables are grown down there, and they hire day laborers. They just go into the local towns and villages, and there's a spot where people are just congregating, and a foreman would go by, they swing around in their pickup truck, hey, we need 6 people to pick almonds today, you 6, get in the back, off you go, and then you got paid at the end of the day. It was actually forbidden in the law not to pay somebody at the end of the day, because these workers historically were among the poorest. They weren't in total poverty where, they're on the brink of starvation. But we're talking paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth, just living day to day. And they were normally in that strata of their economic situation. So you had these poor guys, they're out there, they would hire themselves out for the day, and then they get paid at the end of the day. Notice what the foreman offers. He says, I'm going to pay you a denarius. That was what was called soldier's pay. It was 1 day's wage. It bought enough to kind of get you through a few days to get some bread and whatever other essentials, not a lot. And that's what they're getting paid. So that's the scenario. The foreman goes in, it is 6 o'clock in the morning. He finds some workers there at the town square at the gate. Come on over to the vineyard, we got some work to do. They all truck on over there, and they begin their task. 9 o'clock, the next time, foreman goes back into town. He needs more workers. He finds a few more, hires them again, sends them back, does the same thing at noon, does the same thing at 3, does the same thing right at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. 1 hour before the day is about to end, the foreman is still looking for extra help, goes out, finds a few more people, and brings them back to the vineyard. Everything in this scenario, everything in this parable, is very normal and very natural according to the custom of the day, until it's time for pay. At this moment, everybody lines up, and the foreman begins to hand everybody their denarius. He starts with the last, and he pays them just as much as he pays the first. And this is where we have what we call intentional tension. What's going on here? The laborers begin to grumble. to complain. It says in the text that they expected more. And this is where we find Jesus intentionally pricking the attention of his audience. He wants them to see something unique that sort of cuts against the grain of who we are. What's going on here? Those who had been working all day are looking at the foreman and saying, wait a minute, our hands are sore, our backs are aching. We have had sun beaten down on our head all day long. Bear in mind, at this time of the year, right before the rains begin, it's typically pretty hot. So they are out there slugging it out, sweating it out. They're tired, they're weary, and all of a sudden you have, in their perception, a tremendous injustice. And that's exactly what Jesus wants them to say. Because the point of the story is not about justice. There's three issues that Jesus is surfacing in this parable. The first is that there is no injustice being committed here. Think about it. He tells them, I will pay you what? A denarius in the beginning. I will pay you what's right. Did the landowner renege in any way, shape, or form on his word? Was there any injustice being committed in terms of somebody being denied their pay or cheated in any capacity? The answer is no. There's absolutely no injustice in this. And when we look at the parable, and our first reaction very often is, hey, something's going on here. What's wrong? But in many respects, we do the same thing. It's when we have garage sales. You unload the basement, you go into the attic, you're digging through the closets, you bring all your stuff out. It's Saturday morning. You open up the door, people come in, you're selling your stuff. It's now 3 in the afternoon. You're tired. And there's no way in Hades you're going to schlep all those chairs and all those books back into the house. I am on this board. When I have a garage sale, I don't want to carry another stick. All right? I'm so tired. I'm so worn out by the end of the day. What happens? I got this pile of books. I've been selling them a buck a book all day long. At 3 o'clock, you can have them for a nickel. At 4 o'clock, I'm going to pay you to carry them to your car because I don't want to carry it back down into the basement and let it sit there. Am I being unfair? Not at all. I'm being true to my word. It's my right to change the price if I want to at the end of the day. We do it all the time. So what we see here is that Jesus is clarifying there is no injustice taking place. Number 2, Jesus is surfacing a problem that has been timeless, that creates that issue of being lost in translation, and that is envy. Envy will blind us. It will convolute our judgment. We are warned throughout the Bible over and over again against envy. When you think about in Paul's exhortation to the Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, and then what he says, it does not envy. There are lists of sins in the New Testament: malice, hatred, jealousy, envy. What's happening here? There's envy. Solomon says in the book of Ecclesiastes that envy motivates people to do what they do under the sun. We have to be very careful with this issue of envy because it clouds our understanding of who God is and how He operates. The third point that Jesus is surfacing is grace. We live in a world of ungrace. We live in a world filled with favoritism. We live in a competitive world where everything is earned. You earn your friends, you earn your salary, you earn your reputation. We live in a world that continually looks and asks the question, what could you do for me? That's how it functions. In God's economy, grace is what drives everything. Grace is a free gift. Grace is unmerited. Grace is God bestowing something upon His creation that they don't deserve. And grace is the driving factor behind Jesus and what He has come to do and accomplish. We find that God wants to extend grace to save. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, for it is by grace you've been saved, through faith. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one may boast. The entire scenario of Jesus and His coming to this planet, walking amongst us, teaching, working miracles, proving His deity, confirming over and over again that He is God and that He is pure and that He is holy and that His sacrifice that He makes on the cross is perfect and the only sufficient sacrifice capable of washing away sin. This entire act of Christ, this visitation, His advent, is an act of grace. And it's not just grace to save, it's grace to sustain. We see in Corinthians, for my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. We start in grace, we continue in grace, we end in grace. It's all about grace. And that's the point that's being missed. But the workers who started early failed to see, and this is the sad part for them, is that there is a hidden blessing nestled in this parable that is often overlooked. And that has to do with the fact that those at the end who were hired at the last hour, who came in 60 minutes before sundown, went all day long facing rejection. Nobody hired them. Think about it. These are poor folk. They're living day to day. They're living paycheck to paycheck. Imagine standing around in the square, in the marketplace, at the city gate, looking around, asking, knocking on doors, picking up your phone, seeing who's got work. No, it's no. Everything is, there's doors getting shut all over the place for these guys. The ones who were hired at 6 o'clock, first thing in the morning, were given the gift of assurance. They knew. At the end of the day, they were going to get paid. So yeah, it was hard. And yes, it was difficult. And yes, they bore the burden. But at 9 o'clock, they know, yeah, I'm going to get paid today. At 11 o'clock, yeah, I'm going to get paid today. As another group comes, yeah, we're going to get paid. They had what Fanny Crosby says, that blessed assurance that Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. That famous hymn, blessed assurance, they had. The landowner was going to be good on his word. And as we journey through life, we have a tendency to have this convoluted vision of how life looks and what's going on. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, and if you've accepted Christ when you're 5 years old or 10 years old or 20, whatever, you have that assurance. And yes, there's going to be people who come into the kingdom and accept Christ literally on their deathbed. I've seen folk accept Jesus like minutes before they died. Had an opportunity to lead a guy to Christ. He was actually in a catatonic state. He was like in a coma for a while. He came out for like 36 hours. He was lucid. He was aware of what was going on. We shared the gospel with this guy. He accepted Christ. His wife accepted Christ. And by the end of the day, he was back into the coma and he was dead like 3 days later. I mean, he got in under the wire. But praise God, he got in. Because of God's grace. And we miss this. So what are the applications? What's happening here? There's really three things that we could walk away with. The first is this. Life is not fair, but God is just. We live in a world filled with favoritism. We live in a world filled with nepotism. We live in a world where people don't play by the rules. They lie, they cheat, they steal, and I don't care where you go. It starts in the classroom with little kids. It's on the ball field. It's in Little League. It's in the workplace. It's everywhere. Life isn't fair. And people are going to be dealt a rough hand. And there's some people in life who start off on a horrible foot and it goes from bad to worse. I had a friend of mine in high school. His parents couldn't have children for years. They tried. Finally, mom gets pregnant very late in life, high-risk pregnancy. They are trying their best to take care of this child. The father is driving them to the doctor to have a follow-up checkup, and they get T-boned by somebody in an intersection who runs a red light. And this poor guy who comes in, the baby he survived. Everybody survived, but the mom was terribly hurt in the accident. They had this child that had all sorts of trouble. And all his life, this young kid, he didn't develop well. He was very slow. We used to call him Swivel in high school because he had this unusual buildup of fluid on the brain, and they had this drain in his head that went down into his stomach, and he had to move his head around all the time to relieve the pressure that was building up in his head. It was a sad story. And I'm like, this guy got dealt a horrible hand in life. Life isn't fair. And then you have other people that just show up at the right time and at the right place, and they're millionaires overnight. And it's like, what'd you do? Like, you're just in the right place at the right time. How does this happen? That's life. But God is known for His justice. Psalm 9:16. The Lord is known for His justice. And in the end, in a world filled with injustices, in a world filled with nepotism, in a world filled with favoritism, in a world filled with all sorts of unfairness, in the end, God is just. Number 2, be wary of envy. Be wary of jealousy. Be wary of comparing yourself to the person sitting next to you and the family across the street and the guy down the road and the kid that walks into school who doesn't even study and looks at the textbook and can repeat it verbatim and gets aces on everything, and you're struggling away just to get a C+. Be wary of envy. The book of Proverbs tells us this. A heart at peace is good for the body, but envy rots the bones. It is like a decay in the soul, and it tears you apart. And we envy other people's marriages, we envy other people's paychecks, we envy other people's homes. How many parents feel like losers when you look and you see somebody else's kid out there doing 1,000 times better and it seems effortless, and you've got this kid that's the strong-willed child, and you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to survive 3rd grade? You know, you're wrestling with this little one, and they're bucking the system every time, and then you have this other family in the grocery store, and everybody's just fine. And you're like, why can't my family be normal? And we envy that. Don't. We receive our lot in life, and we need to learn to be content with what God is doing in the here and now. Get out of that comparison mode. It will destroy you. We want to learn from one another. We want to love one another. But boy, we've got to be careful about envying one another. So number 1, we've got to recognize, A, life is unfair, but God is just. B, be wary of envy. And C, be grateful for grace. Be grateful for the grace that God has extended to us today. Be grateful for Jesus Christ. Be grateful for the promises you've been given. Be grateful for the relationship you have with Him. If you don't have that relationship, enter into it and trust Him because He loves you. Be grateful for grace. And I want to give you one final picture and we'll be done. I heard this over the summer. This is a fantastic illustration. Once upon a time, there was a king. And in his kingdom, he reigned in love, but in justice. He was equitable in the courts. There was no bribing. There was no cheating. He displayed wisdom in his court when he would issue decrees. He cared for his subjects, and every decision he made was driven by a desire for their best interest, their well-being. And the people saw this king and they realized he was loving and he was just and he was a good king. The king was also quite wealthy, and he had a huge treasury filled with gold. And one day the treasurer, an honest man, came to the king and said, "We have a problem. Some of the gold is missing." They went back through, they checked things out, and sure enough, the gold supply had begun to shrink. So the king put out a reward for anyone who would find the thief, and also a punishment. Whoever was caught stealing the king's gold was going to get 10 lashes in the public square. A little time went by. They couldn't find the thief. A few weeks later, more gold was missing from the treasury. The king was now even more upset. This may spread out. People may be inclined to steal. We've got to put more emphasis on capturing and bringing justice about. We've got to find this thief. So he raised the reward for those who may report the thief, and he also increased the punishment from 10 lashes to 20 lashes. We've got to deter this. We've got to stop this. Nip it in the bud. A few weeks go by. More gold was gone. No one knew where. No one knew how. But the treasury was starting to shrink. So the king upped the reward. He also upped the punishment from 20 now to 30 lashes. This will definitely deter whoever is out there. A few weeks go by. More gold was gone. No clues. No suspects. The king now, even with a greater sense of drive and urgency, posts the reward higher. He sets the punishment at 40 lashes, which is a death penalty. Whoever gets caught stealing that gold is going to pay with his or her life. We've got to stop this right now. This is justice. We need to keep this from spreading throughout the kingdom. And sure enough, a few weeks later, more gold is gone. So finally the king, he has his death penalty, he's got his reward. He puts together a small assortment of his most trusted soldiers. And they go undercover. They're going to infiltrate the city. They've got to find the thief. So these trusted soldiers are out there. Nobody knows about it except this little secret group that the king assembles. A week goes by, a little more gold is gone. Another week goes by, a little more gold is gone. And finally, one of the soldiers catches somebody in the dead of the night, cloaked with the king's gold. Apprehended red-handed. But the soldier is reluctant to report to the king because the thief is the king's daughter. They go back to the daughter's chamber. They look in the room. They find a secret compartment under the bed, and there's the gold. Caught. Guilty. The king is just. He demands justice. He calls his daughter out into the public square. He brings the executioner in. He has her strapped to the post. He looks at the executioner in front of his entire kingdom and says, "Justice must be served." And he gives the nod to the executioner, and the executioner goes over to the post. And just as the executioner is about to take the whip and begin the beating which will result in death, the king holds up his hand. He says, "I am just, and this is a just kingdom, and justice will be served. But I'm also loving." And with that, he wraps himself around his daughter, and he holds her. And he looks at the executioner and says, "Commence with rendering justice." And the king dies in her place, so that justice would be rendered and freedom would be extended. And that, my friends, is mercy. That is grace. That is what Jesus did for you and for me on a cross 2,000 years ago. And that's the message of the parable that has been convoluted and lost in translation because of envy and jealousy and comparing one to another. The message of grace is what Jesus sought to convey, because he is filled with grace and truth, as John 1:17 says. So on this day, as we consider this kingdom lesson, if you would, number one, life isn't fair, but God is just. Be wary of envy and be grateful for His amazing grace. Let's pray.